This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge, your favorite go-to podcast about weather. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and I would like to thank you for joining us from our WeatherWorks headquarters in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me, as always, is my cool as the other side of the pillow co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Well, you're outdoing yourself with the introductions, Brad. Cool as the other side of the pillow. Why is it nice to have the cool other side of the pillow? Why is that even a good thing?
I just think because we're going into summer, I figured we talk about some cooler other side of the pillow. But that's how you are. You're just kind of cool like that, just kind of cool. Everyone wants to be around you, Mike.
Oh yeah, everybody, I'm sure, but
Well, I'm just trying to keep it fresh, while we're, getting into some of this late spring, early summertime weather.
well, hey, we're finally shaking that winter chill for once. Thank
Yeah, I know.
goodness. I mean, it's been lagging or dragging on for a long time here in spring, but anyway, it's time to start thinking about hurricane season and what to expect for the upcoming summer. I know, not too far from when we're recording this, it's going to be in the 90s for the upcoming weekend. So, pretty excited about that one.
Yeah, and that brings us to our guest today from here in the Weather Lounge is Kyle Leahy, and Kyle is a meteorologist here at WeatherWorks and specializes in long-range forecasts and the tropics. He and meteorologist Kevin Winters put this outlook together for us, and Kyle is here to discuss what they are thinking for the upcoming hurricane season and what we can expect for summer here in the Northeast. Welcome, Kyle, to the Weather Lounge.
Thanks, Brad. It's nice to join you and Mike on the podcast today.
Yeah, so I mean, of course, the big question is, Kyle, let's start off with a look at the upcoming Atlantic hurricane season. It actually officially begins on the date of this airing podcast, June the 1st. So, give us a overall broad brush of what's going to probably happen this year.
Basically, I mean, we don't really see too many stark differences from last year. It's probably going to be another relatively active season. It looks like we're probably going to see some storms in June and July, but usually these are weaker. A lot of the time, these are tropical storms, weaker hurricanes. And then, following climatology, we're going to start to see a peak in activity kind of August, September, with some stronger storms occurring then. And even maybe some storms into October and November, thanks to the pretty warm sea surface temperatures now. But yeah, it's looking like the East Coast could see another pretty active one this year.
Yeah, so I mean, do we have those exact numbers on this that we're actually going with here at WeatherWorks? I know you guys, just created the forecast not long ago, and I think, if we could kind of give those numbers to our listeners and kind of compare that to average a little bit, so they know, how active we're talking about.
Yeah, so in terms of total named storms, we're going with between 15 and 19 throughout the season. For hurricanes, we're going with 6 to 10, and then for major or Cat 3 or higher, we're going with 2 to 4. And again, most of those are going to be in August and September, with 9 to 11 named storms through then, and pretty much all of any major hurricane activity as well, with 2 or 3 around that time.
Gotcha. And like comparing that to normal, so how what is a normal season for named storms typically?
Um, it's usually slightly less. I mean, you're usually talking around like 12 to 15, 13 to 15. So it's not like a hyperactive season like we saw a couple of years ago. But there's definitely a chance of seeing some above normal activity. And again, I mean, we'll get into why, but there definitely are some signals as to why this could be another pretty good one this year.
Yeah, and of course, there's a couple of other popular hurricane forecasts out there. Colorado State, of course, and so of course, NOAA puts out there, and they're about the same, looking for an active season as well. Like you said, though, Kyle, maybe not as a hyperactive season as it was a couple of years ago when we almost
Yeah,
exhausted
exactly.
the Greek alphabet that year. But we'll talk more about that as well later. Yeah, so let's go through the reasonings. Why are you and Kevin kind of seeing an active hurricane season again this year?
So, as we've been in over the last couple of years, we're probably going to be dealing with more La Nina conditions, which is just pretty much cooler than average temperatures through the tropical Pacific. We're again in one now. Temperatures in the central Pacific are around 1 degree Celsius below average. We're probably going to be lifting out of the Nina technically, like as we get into the summer. Like once we're into August and September, there is a chance that we can get more towards neutral. Um, but there is like a 2 to 3 month lag. So in reality, we're probably going to be like experiencing March or April sea surface temperatures by the time we get to the late summer.
So I know we covered El Nino, La Nina in the past. Um, you know, a lot of people out there, listening probably are thinking again, why are those tropical Pacific waters so important? Why does that have an impact on what's going to happen for hurricane season or what's going to happen in the, continuous United States there?
Yeah, I guess kind of what Mike you're saying is, what do we care about the Pacific when we're here on the East Coast?
Yeah,
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
sure, exactly.
They all go hand in hand, right?
So if you could kind of just explain like what kind of effects that La Nina or El Nino do have on the atmosphere and why it's so important to hurricane season.
So a lot of the time, the change in the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific can determine where convection or like thunderstorm activity sets up throughout the tropics. And in the case of La Nina, what ends up happening is a lot of the westerlies get weaker. So that will decrease the amount of wind shear across the Atlantic Ocean. And all that means is that the difference in wind between, let's say, the surface and higher up in the atmosphere is lower. So it'll be easier for tropical systems to kind of organize themselves as opposed to getting kind of ripped apart, which is more likely to occur during an El Nino where those westerlies get stronger.
Right, and that's the important thing to know about hurricanes is that, hurricanes like, you know, those lighter winds aloft. They don't want a whole lot of wind. It's a little bit different than what you would typically would think about when you're thinking about severe weather here in the Northeast or the Great Plains. You're looking in those cases for severe thunderstorms, severe weather. You're looking for that shear. You're looking for that change in wind speed and direction as you go higher up in the atmosphere. But it's totally different for hurricanes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hurricanes want 90 degrees and like no wind over, the Caribbean or the southern, part of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, that's their area to really get going.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
and the whole idea, I mean, they're feeding off those warm, moist waters and that humid air, and they're just building those hot towers really high up into the atmosphere, and then they start spinning.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much.
And that's a lot of forces that go into what makes them spin, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, it's all just Coriolis force for the most part, to get those things starting to spin, and then there's more processes that continue to increase that spin and speed is just a big positive feedback.
Right now, along those points, though, Mike, you also don't want to be too close to the equator because then you don't get the spin. So you kind of want to be in that 10 to 15 degrees latitude before. If you get any less than that, then it's a tough time, because you do need that turning of the Coriolis force to get things going.
And I think there was a storm actually quite recently that actually got very close to the equator. Might have been out in the Pacific, but I can't remember. Do you remember what that was, Kyle?
Yeah, I think it was really only like a year or two ago, but yeah, it was, I think, off the South American coast, and it got like really close to the equator, which is again super rare because you don't really have the spin you need in the vast majority of cases from the Coriolis force. So yeah, that was definitely an exception. It's pretty weird stuff.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly where it was either. It might have been more in the Central Pacific, but possibly like south of Hawaii, which is kind of strange out there anyway. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of getting off on a tangent there, but I just you mentioned the equator thing, and I just thought of that storm that was like, man, that was really close and was very rare to have that happen. So
While we're talking about that, there's something that a lot of folks ask, not only me sometimes, about hurricane season is what happens when a storm goes from the Pacific to the Atlantic or vice versa. I mean, it actually changes its. Does it change its? Yeah, I think it changes its name. Correct.
I mean, that's pretty rare that that happens, but I believe so because I'm pretty sure there's a different list.
it's definitely a different list. It does get a different name. The problem is it's very hard for it to do because there's a lot of mountains in Mexico, and for the storm to survive as you know an intact entity.
Well, I think it happens more from Pacific to Atlantic, but again, not exact storm itself, but like you'll get the moisture and you'll get energy that kind of falls apart as it goes into Central America and the mountainous part of like southern Mexico, and then it evolves back in the Atlantic where the Bay of Campeche and it's so warm in there, and it'll spawn a brand new system, of course, then it will get an Atlantic name. So, but I just wanted to cover that quick.
Yeah, two separate names, that's for sure. And while we're on names, it is quite interesting. I was looking at the list a little bit this year,
Yeah.
and I saw a few names on there, and I didn't know what they were going for. Sometimes I feel like they have like a almost like a theme going on. And I saw Fiona, and I saw
Gaston.
Gaston, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, okay, wasn't it Princess Fiona in Shrek?
Oh yeah,
I think, and then it
Gaston.
was Gaston was in Beauty and the Beast, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, are we going for like a kids animated theme here with this season's names? But from what I can see, that was the only two that started, um, throwing a
Yeah.
trigger for
Well,
me.
and for our listeners too, I mean, the Hurricane Center recycles these list of names every 6 years. But of course, if one gets retired by the World Meteorological Organization, and like there's a couple of new names I remember, I don't remember. Like I think Ian, doesn't that take the place of Igor? I think I can't remember.
Of Ivan,
Maybe
maybe.
Ivan. Yeah, I knew the I name is new.
Yeah, I haven't seen Ian in a very
Yeah.
long time. It seems like a new one.
So
Martin.
it seems like Alex and Bonnie have been around forever.
Yeah.
I always remember
Yeah.
that. Oh yeah, Alex is back or Bonnie's back this year.
Well, if you think about it, it is very
Right, to
difficult
get those
to
first
have an
yeah.
A or B storm to be retired, because typically that happens early in the
Right.
season. A lot of times they get sheared apart quick and they're weaker, so it's hard to get a memorable
Yeah,
destructive
I think the only
storm
A
that they
storm
would
was
retire.
Allison. That was actually a tropical storm, but it flooded out so much of like southeast Texas. I mean, we're going back I think to the 90s, but
Yeah, you're missing a big one.
oh yeah, of course, Andrew. Yeah. Yeah,
Andrew,
you're right.
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah, I don't know what cycle of names that was in though, with the 6-year cycle, but yeah, I forgot all about Andrew. Yeah. Geez, how can I forget about
Isn't
Andrew?
it 30 years?
92 was it?
Andrew was a long time
Yeah, it might
ago.
have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right,
Uh,
Mike. It might have been about 30 years. Yeah.
Meanwhile, Kyle's over here like, I'm not even born
Andrew,
yet.
what are you guys talking about?
1992. Yeah, Hurricane Andrew,
Homestead.
August
Yeah,
1992.
Homestead, Florida.
Yeah, I mean that was a very memorable. I mean, obviously I wasn't down there, but I just remember the coverage of it. And it was such an impressive storm that intensified so quickly at the last second when it went over South Florida. Actually to a category 5.
And then it made it all the way to New Orleans too after that. Not as bad though, but still.
I just remember there's a couple of YouTube videos out there that you probably should check out if you're listening to this podcast. I don't know exactly the names, but if you search Hurricane Andrew in the eye or anything like that, or Hurricane Andrew winds, I think there's some video of like people inside a hotel and they're walking through the stairwell and you could just hear the raging and the whistling of how strong those winds were outside, and it's just so impressive.
Well, speaking of names, though, this is the second year now that we're going with the supplemental list. If we do get all the way past, Walter. And like we said earlier, a couple of years ago, we almost exhausted the Greek alphabet. So I guess they've come out now with a stable, Greek alphabet, or not a Greek alphabet anymore. Just have a supplemental list instead of names in case we do get past Walter. But last year, thankfully, we didn't have to go into that list. Hopefully this year
Yeah,
either.
for ads, for as impactful as last year was, there weren't like an excessive amount of storms. Like everything definitely shut off at a point.
Yeah, it kind of did. I do remember. Yeah, remember it was already it was pretty active all the way through September. Then it just like hit a wall, and that was it.
Yeah, it just shut
Yeah,
off. Yeah, yeah, it was done.
but there were some memorable ones.
Yeah, I mean, obviously memorable storms. You had Ida, last year that impacted the Gulf Coast right around Louisiana, and then it traveled all the way up, through the spine of the Appalachians, Ohio Valley, and then in through New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and there was actually a tornado outbreak with it as it rolled through with the remnants.
And then the flooding, of course.
Yeah, and yeah, actually, I think in our WeatherWorks training sessions for summer weather, not long ago, we just talked about that situation and how crazy and anomalous it was as that moved
Well,
through.
the real unfortunate part was it was so deadly. I mean, it killed more people here in the Northeast and New Jersey, New York, than it did where it made landfall down along the Gulf Coast. And again, because of the flooding, it's just it was a bad time when the flooding occurred in the middle of the night like that. And it's horrible.
And there was even what was it, Hermine too?
Yeah, there was another one too. Yeah.
That caused a lot of flooding in the area. Do I have that right? I think so.
I think it might be Henri.
Henri, was it?
Henri.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, it is Henri. See, I got goofed up because I'm looking at Hermine on the list.
Yeah, on the list
Yeah.
this year, yeah.
On the new list. So yeah, Henri. Sorry about that.
I think they used that one not too long ago, actually.
So while we're on that topic, Kyle, how does that work now? Let's I mean, Mike and I, of course, have know how it all works, but explain to our listeners, with the trough ridge pattern, what happens now when we get a hurricane that maybe travels all the way across the Atlantic from off of Africa and it develops as it moves westward. Now, let's say it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. What are the options here? What are we watching for?
I mean, this year there aren't too many signals that would kind of lead to one particular track or the other in the Gulf. So like favoring a track towards Texas or favoring a track towards like Western Florida. But yeah, I mean, the fact that there aren't really too many signals kind of shows that there really can be storms anywhere in the Gulf this year, especially considering how warm it is. There has even been some like tropical development teased at by like the GFS, which is, I mean, it's probably out to lunch, but I mean, it's happened before. There have been like tropical storms forming this early in the Gulf because it's so warm. But I would say there aren't any inclinations that it's going to be as hyperactive down there as it has been over the last couple of years because they've been getting hammered over the last couple of years down there. Right now, I mean, the biggest signal that we're seeing, which is definitely like on the anomalous side, is a big high pressure over like the northern Atlantic and Nova Scotia, kind of pushing into northern New England, which does favor
East Coast
landfalls on the East Coast. Yeah, because a lot of the time what happens is those storms will try to recurve and they just kind of hit a wall. So
yeah,
that's not to say.
Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm just trying to clarify for some of the listeners out there. I mean, as far as a recurve, basically we're talking about a storm that is moving to the west through the Atlantic, and then typically after a while it gets caught up in the flow that's coming from the west and kind of gets pulled to the north and curves out to sea. So when he's talking about a recurve, that's what he's talking about. And when he's running into a wall, the wall is that big high pressure that you just mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that there won't be recurving storms. I mean,
it's all timing, right?
That's kind of that's just kind of the path of least resistance. Like they want to do that. There's probably also going to be a bunch of storms curving out into like the open Atlantic. There isn't like a particular path to do so. Maybe towards like the Azores, like all the way out there in the kind of central to eastern Atlantic. But yeah, there's there's definitely a heightened risk for some East Coast impacts because of that big blocking high.
Yeah, it was quite interesting when I was helping to put together our hurricane forecast, and I was looking at the analysis that you and Kevin came up with, and to see those anomalous areas that kind of lead into the eastern half of the United
Yeah.
States, basically caught my eye right away. Because usually you have something in the Caribbean or the Gulf, and you have something like a recurve
Yeah, exactly.
situation, towards Bermuda. And then this one, I was like, oh, geez, that looks like it's kind of favored to go more towards an impact track, rather than the curve out. So in the years that I've been doing this, which, I mean, it's a good amount of years, but I don't want to say I'm too old, but I don't remember seeing a track map like that.
I think that last year, looking at last year's outlook, there was kind of like a high in like the central Atlantic and a little bit of like a trough towards the Azores. So you'd have like this kind of favored recurve track and then this favored open Atlantic track and then kind of this opening in the Gulf for storms to move through. But yeah, this year is a bit different where there's just this very big signal for kind of storms to be forced towards the coast, not necessarily to impact the coast, but it seems like this year there's a bit of a higher probability than we would normally expect for sure.
Well, thanks for being the doomsayer for the whole East Coast. Now everybody's going to go freak out because they listened to the podcast and they saw about, oh my gosh, East Coast is going to be under the gun. But it's not to say that yes, there's going to be a direct impact,
Yeah, yeah,
by a
exactly.
major hurricane in you know. Uh, Virginia Beach, we're not saying that. We're just saying that, look, the pattern can favor storms that are going to be closer to the coast and possibly make impact. To say where that's going to occur at this point would just kind of be irresponsible, but at least we have a general idea of who might be more favored to see some of these impacts.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's even the same kind of thing during the winter, where you can point out like a very favorable pattern for like a large winter storm. But if Boston's going to get hit, or New York City, or DC, like who's to say? But there definitely is a heightened probability for kind of more impacts than normal this year. Yeah.
And it is interesting too that, you know, as of late, our hurricane tracking and hurricane forecasting is getting much better. And especially as of late, I think they're actually reducing the cone that you usually see with the storm tracks. And right, I mean, and if you see over the years that cone where that hurricane is forecast, it has gotten much smaller in just maybe the last 15 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you go back just 10, 15 years, you can see the difference.
Yeah, I think now it's like instead of forecasting the track, like forecasting the track is generally a good bit easier because it's just a matter of where like the steering winds are, which you can forecast using these high and low pressures. What's really difficult is getting the strength right. That's still that's still a big challenge because a lot of the time storms can intensify super rapidly, and it's really tough to predict when that's going to happen because a lot of the processes are really complex and we're still kind of doing research on them as we speak. But yeah, track wise, we've definitely gotten much better at that.
And and one thing, I used to go to classrooms and stuff, and talk to the kids and talk to them about weather. I would ask them a question: what do you think's harder to predict, a tornado or a hurricane? Of course, all their hands would go up. It's a hurricane. It's a hurricane. I said no. I said actually, a tornado is harder to predict because I said, we don't know where the tornado is going to form. We have a good idea where there could be a tornado, but the hurricane's out there. It's out in the open. There it is. We know the storm is there. We actually know how strong it is. Yeah, it could get stronger, could get weaker, but you know, we have a good idea also where it's headed. And like Mike was just saying, and Kyle was just saying, that room for error has gotten smaller and smaller, and that's great.
Yeah, I mean, so that's again, I mean, a real big advancement here over the last several years is that track forecasting. But like Kyle said, the intensity is another thing. There's a lot of times where there's underestimates, I feel, on intensity. I mean, I believe that might have happened with Hurricane Michael not too long ago.
Yeah, there were a lot in the Gulf that did that. It might have been Laura, was it Laura?
That is possible too. That rings a bell. But I know that a lot of those storms have intensified rapidly, and that is definitely, if you're ever monitoring a hurricane for your area, if this hurricane is strengthening as it's moving into the coast, that's something you never want to see.
Yeah, it's definitely worse.
That's the worst case scenario. You don't want storms to be strengthening as they're making that landfall. Fortunately, a lot of the storms that impact further north here are typically in the weakening phases up here in the northeast.
Running into that wind shear.
Yeah, and they're making a transition from the tropical characteristics to more of a synoptic, mid-latitude weather system. So,
Of course, there was one big exception though with that, Mike.
yeah, well, yeah, of course you have Sandy. That was a giant anomaly where, I mean, you had a big trough of low pressure diving through the Ohio Valley and into the Appalachians, and it kind of just sucked Hurricane Sandy back into that trough.
And that was that high bridge, that bridging high over New England, also that Kyle was talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously not to say anything like that is going to happen, but I mean, that's why you kind of don't like to see that because it it increases the amount of time that you have for like an interaction like that to occur. Again, it's also like that in the winter too. A lot of the time those highs just slow everything down and they kind of let stuff congeal.
We got to get rid of that high. Or it's got to move somewhere.
Mike's got his
Yeah.
stories about Sandy, though. I wasn't at WeatherWorks yet, but I was down south. I was still down south.
That was a crazy night, honestly. I mean, never really experienced that.
That was a Sunday night, wasn't it, or was it a Saturday night?
You know what?
I might have been a Saturday.
I don't honestly remember. I know I was working. We had to stay in a hotel nearby the office because we knew that there was going to be road closures from trees down and power lines and things like that. And there certainly were. But yeah, that was one crazy morning coming in the pre-dawn hours because we had power because we had a generator, but then we had issues with the internet because all the lines were down.
It's hard to get observations and
So
forecasts out and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, it's not a good situation when you have one of our backup internets working, which is fantastic, so we can still get out forecasts. But then you're also using your phone's LTE or 4G at that time to try to get some sort of information. And then once you did get on something, all the stations were down anyway. Because the power was knocked out to all of New Jersey and Long Island and all these places, so you couldn't get observations in. And then I thought to myself too, okay, I'm going to make this forecast, I'm going to send it out, but is anybody going to get it? Because of the power outages and everything else and the downed internet. So yeah, that was one crazy circumstance, that's for sure. So let's hope, Kyle, that the whole Sandy scenario doesn't go ahead happening. Everybody's gonna lock onto that and say, "Oh, they're saying that it's gonna be a Sandy scenario again."
Everything's compared to Sandy, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a real freak occurrence. I mean, something like that happening could pretty much only happen like October or later because that's when you get like the stronger like synoptic weather as well. Like
Like Mike said, the trough.
yeah, like something like Sandy could not happen in the summer. It's just impossible.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you just don't have that big upper level low
Yeah, exactly.
to provide that cold air. And don't forget, on the backside of Sandy was snow in the
Yeah, it was like
Appalachians.
record-breaking snow.
And I'm talking like 30 inches of snow in some
Yeah,
spots.
yeah.
Meanwhile, up here in the Northeast, we just got the wind, and we might have had like 1 to 3 inches of snow, but we just had not 1 to 3 inches of snow. Sorry, 1 to 3 inches of rain, but the surge into the coastline, flooding the subways and
Tidal surge, yeah.
New
Oh
York
my God.
City, and the wind damage with 80-mile-an-hour gusts. Yeah, I think there was even like 80-mile-an-hour gusts out to like Allentown, Pennsylvania. So, I mean, that's pretty far inland to have that type of wind. And I think what helped that whole situation is that you didn't have the wind around a compact core like you would in a hurricane, because it made that transition to more like a giant nor'easter. So when it made that transition, then the wind field spreads out more, and then you're getting these wind gusts of 60 to 80 miles an hour over a much larger area than just a 50-mile wide you know diameter near the core of a hurricane. So let's wrap it up real quick here for the hurricane outlook. So Kyle, just give us a quick breakdown, quick summary real quick, in case somebody's just getting into it now.
So pretty much, we're looking at a slightly above average hurricane season in terms of named storms. Again, we're going between 15 and 19. Overall, it looks like the East Coast is probably at the highest risk of like above average impacts. That's not to say that the Gulf can't see impacts as well, as they always do. But it looks like the pattern that we'll be seeing with a big high over like Nova Scotia and the North Atlantic is definitely going to favor impacts towards the East Coast. So, not to say that we're going to be seeing the same kind of impact as we saw last year, which were pretty substantial with Henri and Ida. But again, there is a heightened risk for something like that to occur this year.
Well, thanks a lot, Kyle. We're going to go into the summer outlook for all you out there who are looking for the heat and humidity and all that fun thunderstorm activity that'll come with it. Stay tuned for after this break, because we'll talk more with Kyle Leahy, one of our long-range meteorologists here, about the summer outlook. So stay tuned.
You're listening to The Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hello and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. Our topic today is the hurricane outlook for the Atlantic and the summer outlook for here in the Northeast. And we have already covered what's possibly going to happen this year in the Atlantic for the hurricane season, the first half of our podcast today. So for our second half here, we continue with meteorologist Kyle Leahy, and he's got an update on what to look for this upcoming summer here in the Northeast. He and Kevin Winters put this outlook together. And so, with the La Nina, of course, we talked a lot about that with the hurricane outlook, Kyle. I guess that has a lot of bearing on what's going to happen for our heat prospects for this year.
Yeah, so generally speaking, La Ninas tend to favor kind of hotter and usually drier summers throughout most of the U.S. and El Ninos usually leads to be they usually tend to be cooler and wetter. And again, even though the Ninas probably going to be in the process of weakening as we head through the summer, that lag is still going to lead to the Nina that's kind of happening now, impacting us over the next 2 to 3 months.
So, Kyle, is there anything that could possibly throw this Nina into more of a neutral state faster, or are a lot of things supporting it, kind of hanging on long enough?
There's actually been kind of a renewal of the Nina, which is quite rare around this time of year. But it's actually kind of dug its heels in a bit. So if anything, we're probably looking to have it kind of hold on a little bit longer. So if you look at those plumes of different kind of ensemble members, which is basically one model is initialized and they kind of tweak um, the model a little bit and run it a bunch of different times. It looks like we're probably going to be heading towards those kind of cooler members rather than the warmer ones, only because the Nina is really kind of setting in a bit. So it's probably going to be more um, of a kind of typical Nina summer throughout much of the U.S., but it's really going to play more of a role kind of farther out west, it seems.
As long as we get rid of this negative NAO that we've been dealing with all spring.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about that a little bit real quick, Kyle. What happened in the spring? I mean, we had a couple of mild days in March, and then all of a sudden everything just kind of went downhill, and we actually I think got colder in April. I think it snowed more in April than it did in March.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, what ended up happening was, uh, for pretty much all the winter, we've had a really strong polar vortex up in the stratosphere, and what that does is that it kind of encourages a strong polar vortex where we live in the troposphere. And when you have that strong polar vortex, a lot of the cold air kind of stays up by the pole. It's really difficult to dislodge it, and that's why we had a pretty warm February and a pretty warm start to March. But what happened was that polar vortex up in the stratosphere weakened very rapidly, and the winds actually ended up reversing. So that led to the polar vortex down here weakening quickly, and we ended up getting a big blocking high over Greenland, which ends up forcing this big persistent low pressure over like Nova Scotia and kind of poking into New England. So that's why we had a lot of very cold weather relative to average. And yeah, it's not very common that happens. I mean, it's been happening over the last few years, but uh it was uh it was very anomalous. It's something that doesn't really happen too often.
So,
Yeah.
so we kind of still in that pattern now, just because we're into May and June, it has to warm up anyway. But it looks like it's kind of backed off a little bit now, and like you said, it's more La Nina anyway now. And is this does this kind of trend going to continue? Is that why you're maybe thinking it's going to be maybe more cool shots versus hot weather this upcoming summer?
I mean, it looks like we're gonna see a bit of a reversal with the NAO, it seems. But also, kind of as you get into the summer, a lot of those teleconnections like the NAO don't really hold as much weight because a lot of the wavelengths get shorter, which pretty much just means like the dips in the jet stream get a lot shorter.
We don't get the big long,
Hmm.
troughs and big long ridges, that
Yeah.
build up a big area of warmth or a big area of cold.
Yep. And I think a lot of the reason why this summer could have some cooler shots isn't necessarily because of like cold air diving in from Canada or anything like that. It's probably going to be because of just how wet the summer looks. Like it's tough for the summer to be that warm if there's a lot of clouds and precipitation.
Hmm. So what's the big contributor to bringing all this wet weather over the summer? I mean, you're kind of alluding to a wetter than normal summer, at least east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, so most of that, like a pretty big contributor, is probably going to be tropical activity.
Oh, here he goes with the tropical
I
stuff on the
know.
East Coast again. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's really not too many dissimilarities from last summer, really, where it wasn't like strikingly warm during the day, really. I mean, pretty much the reason why last summer was so warm was because of how warm it was overnight. It was so, yeah, like it was so humid and there was so much moisture in the air that it was really difficult for it to cool down very much. Like there were a lot of lows in the 70s and stuff like that.
Last summer, I don't remember any long duration like hot spells. Yeah, we get a couple of days worth where it got to 90 in the low 90s, but until you got down to the deep south, it just seemed like maybe one or two hot days and a front would come through, and then we start the process all over again. And I don't remember any like, oh my God, it's hot and humid for the last month, and it just that didn't happen. Like I think you're right that those overnight lows is what kept the average temperature above normal versus maybe the high temperatures were actually below normal.
Hmm. Yep. We've also kind of seen over the last, I mean, this pattern has been occurring for a while, but there's like this persistent like Western Atlantic ridge that's been there for, I mean, like the last 5 years really. It's been pretty persistent. And a lot of the time that kind of clockwise circulation helps kind of promote like a lot of southerly flow, which leads to a lot of moisture. So that's not to say there aren't going to be some heat waves. I mean, just given the climate that we're in. But yeah, I mean, like when all said and done, I don't really see too much of a departure occurring from last year's, last summer's weather, it seems.
But this just brings back memories geez, my parents never had air conditioning. And I know maybe I'm spoiled now because, a lot of people do have it. But I just remember all they had was like a big fan upstairs. Upstairs, and it was like into the ceiling, so it would like suck in the cooler air from the outside. And during those heat waves, like it was awful to start out the night, and it took until like about the time you needed to wake up for it to start finally cooling down, because the lows got down to like 65 or 70. But I'm just envisioning that when you're talking about these warm nights and humid nights, and I'm just like, I have that entrained in my head, just laying there and dying.
That's kind of already happened. That's already happened. I think Boston, in the middle of May, had just a couple of weeks ago their overnight lows. They broke, I think, 2 records in a row where their overnight low didn't drop below 65, and that was like
Yeah, I can see it being like another kind of summer like that.
right. So you wonder if it's setting up something like that.
Yeah,
Yep.
it'd be like those nights where it's 9:30 at night and it's still like 80 something degrees outside,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
you're going, oh my god, how's it still so warm when it's dark?
Yeah, exactly. Like
But
it's really tough to drop the temps when the dew points are like around like 70. It's just there's just so much moisture in the air.
all right, so in general for the United States, we're talking about above normal temperatures. Talking about some, humid, sticky nights on the East Coast. Out west, I mean, I imagine all the heat that's going to happen out there is not going to be beneficial.
Yeah, it's probably going to reinforce like the drought conditions that we've been seeing. Like a good amount of the desert Southwest is in like exceptional drought. Um, I mean, last year, like the Arizona, New Mexico region did get a lot of help from the monsoon. They recorded a pretty wet summer compared to average. So there is a chance that they could see some relief with that monsoon, but it looks like in terms of the driest weather and the hottest weather, it seems like we're kind of settling around like the northern Rockies and the kind of plains regions.
Plains and northern Rockies. Well, hopefully that monsoon will come into the desert Southwest sometime in July and help them out a little bit. With some more rainfall and maybe a little quench on the drought there, just a little bit. You know, uh, like
Anything would
some
help out there. Yeah.
yeah, like some Gatorade for it. Thirst quencher. That was a bad joke. Anyway, um, so that's what we're talking about out west. So what are we talking about for severe weather? I know it seems like severe weather season has been pretty active so far. Yeah, in the spring. So what does that mean, going into the summer, as we deal with those severe weather and flooding threats?
Yep. So in terms of severe, it looks like kind of the general pattern that we're going to be seeing throughout the summer is you're probably going to have like a weak western ridge as well as again that persistent ridging over like the Nova Scotia area. And a lot of the time what happens is you'll end up getting kind of energy rolling over that ridge into the kind of upper Midwest and Northeast, kind of like what we saw a decent amount of the time last year. We had a lot of events like that where you'd have kind of energy rolling in, and then you'd get like a squall line or something like that. There were a lot of surprises last year
Couple
where,
derechos last year, I remember.
yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
what it's kind of envisioning when I'm thinking of what you're explaining. I'm like, oh no. Hopefully that doesn't mean a few derechos that develop, on the north side of that
Doritos?
ridge.
I'd like Doritos.
I didn't
Yeah,
say Doritos,
Oh, oh.
derechos. Those big windstorms from thunderstorm complexes that last for like 250 miles.
But yeah, I mean, there aren't any like striking like severe like analogs or comparisons or anything like that, but I could envision another pretty active year for severe weather, like similar to last year. Um, but again, like a good amount of the severe events that we saw from last year were due to the tropical activity. Like you had stuff with Elsa, where you had the storms firing out ahead of that. Ida, of course. There were all the tornadoes. So
That's right. We had supercells ahead of Elsa, didn't we?
yep. That's when there was like the tennis ball sized hail
Yeah.
in Bergen County, I think.
Well, heck, not too long ago, we just had some giant hail
Going
that
down
happened
DC. Yeah, yeah.
south
Oh
of
yeah.
DC into the Delmarva Peninsula there. I think they had 2 to 3 inch diameter
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
hail,
crazy.
Yep,
which
they did.
is
Very rare for down
that's
there.
pretty hard to do up in this neck of the woods. I mean, yeah, we can get that out in the Great Plains, but man, that storm really did some work. I think it was probably the only show in town. Uh, but
Yeah, I mean, aside from that kind of bust of a day, yeah.
yeah, I mean, there was a severe weather outbreak around the middle of
Farther
May
north.
that was, you know, forecasted to be rather substantial.
May 16th to be exact.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I always see that um, that meme online that has like the the chair knocked over in the guy's backyard, and it's like, "We will rebuild," that sort of thing. Really
That's more the
knocking,
hurricane one. Yeah, yeah.
you know. So hey, as forecasters, we see it all. As meteorologists, we know the criticism out there. Don't. We've heard it all before. So, but yeah, I mean, there was a lot of media hype going on around that outbreak too, and a lot of places, it was a little bit overdone. But
Well, the severe
um,
weather was kind of displaced about 100 miles north of here, or it was more up
yeah,
towards like upstate New York and parts of New England. But yeah, I mean, the potential was there. We saw the signs, we saw the signals, and you got to forecast what you see. And sometimes it doesn't always, Mother Nature's got the final say.
and just remember, if you do ever see some crazy headlines coming out, I mean, that's just a practice in watch out for the hype. If you ever see something like millions of people to be impacted by damaging winds or something like that, maybe go and get a more reliable source to look at. Maybe your local news guy or whoever it may be might be a guy.
Like WeatherWorks,
I didn't say WeatherWorks. You said WeatherWorks. I'm not putting in a shameless
we
plug,
are
but
reliable. We are reliable.
okay, so I am putting in a shameless plug for WeatherWorks. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, just head to a reliable source and kind of investigate a little bit because you got to be prepared and you got to be prepared with the correct information too. Um, so severe weather threats, we kind of covered here for the summer. Flooding, I imagine that's going to fall along the lines of what happens with the tropical disturbances.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be a pretty big part of it as well. I mean, if you do get even one not even an East Coast impact, you can have storms that kind of make landfall in the Gulf like Ida did, and you just get kind of a surge of moisture. So really, only one or two systems can really skew a summer one way or the other. So it wouldn't really take too much. Um, so in terms of flooding, there's definitely a heightened risk this year. I think a lot of the analogs that we've been looking at are like very wet for pretty much all the East Coast. Like generally, like 1 to 3 inches of precip, like above average. So there there's a good signal. And yeah, so I think in terms of flooding, it's could be pretty similar last year.
And usually it's the rainfall rates that does it, Kyle. Right? I mean, it's yeah. Of course, you get 2 to 4 inches of rain over a 24-hour period. You're gonna get some big time flooding as well, river flooding and stream and creek. But it's the other ones like what Ida. There was rain falling 2 to 4 inches per hour in some places in northeast New Jersey, and I mean, I think I saw a report someone got like 5 to 6 inches within an hour, and that's just like you can't deal it. You can't. It cannot drain that fast. It just goes everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, think about how strong of a rate 2 to 4 inches an hour would be in a snowstorm.
Right.
You know,
Think
if you
about
get
that.
two
Yeah.
to 4 inches an hour in a snowstorm, you're going, holy smoke. But really, the liquid at a 2 to 4 inches in an hour in a snowstorm is probably zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.4 as far as the actual liquid that's there. So we're talking about 2 to 4 inches of liquid.
But how much snow would that be, Mike? 20 to 40 inches of
Oh
snow.
yeah, 20 to 40 inches in an hour, right?
Think
Yeah.
about that.
So obviously that's not a situation that's going to be going down for the fact that cold air can't hold as much moisture as warm air and da 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 and yada yada yada. It won't happen. Uh,
Oh, we saw it happen. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, those rates are crazy sometimes, and Brad brought up definitely a good point for those poor drainage areas. You really got to watch them when you're having those high rates.
Right. And you start hearing terms like flash flooding used, and that's when you really got to, think about, getting to higher ground or getting out of some place that may flood pretty quickly. I mean, look at that. What was that? The town in Maryland, Ellicott City. I mean,
Yes.
twice in what 4 years, and I mean it's just and I'm sure every time there's like thunderstorms coming through that area, the folks there have got to just be on edge, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's for sure. And with all that rain in the forecast, for those of you battling your lawn here in the spring, it doesn't look like you're going to get much of a break here. I know I'm struggling to keep up with one cut a week on my lawn because it's
It's
growing
already,
like,
yeah.
oh my goodness. I mean, I know it grew in the matter of maybe 3 days. I saw it was growing enough where it could have been cut again.
Right. Well, with the cool start to summer, it was a slow process, but then you're right. As soon as we got that first humid, warm week, I mean, everything just went boom. It's like pollen, leaves, grass, everything just blew up.
All right. Well, so that's the summer as far as we've covered so far. And so, Kyle, hottest month, what are we looking at?
Hottest month for like the East Coast is probably going to be June, it seems, because around that time, I mean, at least compared to average,
Okay,
um,
okay, okay.
yeah, like usually July is the warmest because, at that point everything starts to warm up after the sun's the highest. But in terms of compared to average, seems like June because like by then the tropics don't really, you know, fire yet. And it doesn't look particularly as wet as July and August. So I guess those two factors are probably going to lead to it being warmer than average, more so compared to July and August. Yeah.
Well, then of course we're getting more into tropics then too, like you said. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And hit us with the wettest month compared to normal.
Probably August, I think.
August. And yep, tropical. I got it. We're getting closer to the heart of the season, so gonna be a wet August, that's for sure. But hey, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Kyle, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, pleasure.
yeah, and of course, thanks, Kevin. Well, let's give Kevin Winters his due. Also, he's not with us today, but he also helped Kyle with the outlook, and hopefully we'll have Kevin around into the fall too. And both Kevin and Kyle may join us again for the winter outlook. Isn't that right, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's possible. Hey, and that's not coming up too much longer.
Oh
I just
no,
said to one
come
of my
on, no, no, no,
Yeah. No,
our
I mean,
first our first look at it's in August. I mean,
no.
that's only
I'm
like,
I'm calling out
you
sick
know,
that month, the whole
90
month.
days. Uh But that pretty much does it for the Weather Lounge podcast. So, again, a big thank you to Kyle Leahy, one of our meteorologists, for being a guest on our podcast today. And remember, you can visit weatherworksinc.com to learn all you want to know about us, and visit WeatherWorks Inc. on social media too. We're on all the platforms out there. We have a new episode of this podcast every 2 weeks, so please come back and listen to new ones. And we're on every podcast platform that you can find: Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. The list goes on. And I think our good old production manager, Mike Priante, seems to find a new one almost every other 2 weeks. So, so thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you next time.